My name is Jerm. This is Germ Warfare, the battle of ideas. Charles, another week without Mike, so it's just you and I again.
I know, it is.
I'm sorry about this.
Well, I don't think apologies are really necessary. I hope not to the audience, certainly not to you or me, and I don't think to Mike. I mean, as I made the point last week, it's great that he's got some time off, and I have heard a little bit. I know he's having a good time, so that is to be held in the mind, front and center, and he'll be back soon enough.
I've got a very important question based on a comment that both you and I saw recently under one of our videos. Charles, why do you dye your hair?
Fun enough, I have once dyed my hair for, and this could be regarded as terribly distasteful. It was for a fancy dress party, absolutely years ago, and I can't even remember what the theme was. And I can't quite remember why I dyed my hair, but I dyed my hair black. And the only reason that this is even mildly amusing is that I subsequently met a person who I chatted to quite a bit at that party several weeks later, by which time, you know, it was a kind of temporary dye had washed out, and the look on this young guy's face, he knew there was something that was right about the next conversation. He knew that we'd spoken, that, you know, but he was just doing the processing thing. Something has changed quite radically, and he couldn't quite work out what it was. And finally, he struck upon it. Your hair's completely changed, assuming that black was naturally the color of my hair and that I must have dyed it out. So yeah. Anyway, there was a comment. I forget what you'll have to remind me. What exactly did it say? Real men. Yeah, I can't hear you now. Your sound's off.
I'm so sorry, I had my mic off.
Sorry.
I can't remember what topic was.
Real men don't dye their hair, or
that's right,
something like that. It was absolutely brilliant, because it had nothing to do with anything that particular recording had discussed, I think that should covered or touched on. Or
that should be my new tagline. Yeah. Never mind the battle of ideas. Germ warfare. Real men don't dye their hair.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think keep it in reserve. You know, it's there if you need it. But it was great. It was really good. I enjoy comments like that, because they are so far removed from anything that one's really thinking about. They're absolutely great. And it leads into, you know, it could lead into a load of stuff. In fact, on the real men stuff, the BBC World Service this morning was promoting a program called The Conversation, which I think, in fact, is traditionally a Radio 4 program. But anyway, at times it has, if I'm remembering correctly, it can be interesting, because it involves people who have had an experience, had a sort of shared experience, and it's sometimes a sort of retrospective. So they'll be gathered together and they'll talk about something significant. And okay, this is the BBC, so invariably it's going to be some sort of a mainstream topic, but nonetheless, you can't really dismiss the first-hand experience that somebody has. Obviously, the view that they will take of it might be different from yours when you listen, but still. And what we were talking about this morning was, I mean, the slant put on it was absolutely amazing, but it was this word that I'm actually still quite unfamiliar with, the manosphere. And it was said in such terms of absolute revulsion. It seems to be based on. I don't even know what that means. Do you know? I tried to look it up. I don't really know, but it seems to be based on the mainstream universal sort of progressive hatred of Andrew Tate and of anybody that wants to emulate either the philosophy or the lifestyle of Andrew Tate.
I've just looked it up.
Okay. And I think the reason this has come about is because Louis Theroux has made a documentary about these people who apparently occupy the manosphere. But as the BBC does uniquely well, they've sort of created this bracket, which now has been formalized in BBC speak, as though it really exists, as though there's a sort of codified membership, and it's a absolutely bona fide a thing, as opposed to just a rather loose description, which some people may think they fit into or may want to fit into or whatever else. But it's I mean, you know, it's just another interesting look behind the, I suppose, behind the screen or seen or whatever you want to say at the way that the mainstream is there to curate public opinion and sort of nudge people back onto track when they're thinking the wrong things. And it again, I think just to finish the point, it's what the BBC is best at, which is patronizing people. Anyone who thinks that Andrew Tate is a wizard or has a masterful command of either sort of life or philosophy, fine. I mean, I think to not credit people with being able to see through any of the things that come in front of them is, as I say, remarkably patronizing. But it's just interesting the way in which they do it and who they select as targets that have to be sort of, myth busted and all this kind of stuff.
I'm actually a fan of, topics relating to masculinity. I think manosphere is obviously just an online term. Andrew Tate, just for example, is an anomaly because he's obviously a terrible example to men in many ways, and yet he does say some things that are correct. So what happens is that you end up with this blurring of the lines. I don't think he's in any way, moral or ethical or upstanding, but he does make valid points, and so now it becomes complicated because now it doesn't become a binary thing anymore. You can't just dismiss him because he has made a lot of valid points over the years. But nonetheless, I don't know if you listened to my conversation with James Walton last week about, everyday carry.
Yeah, I did. Well, and funnily enough, that's exactly what I was about to talk about in relation to Andrew Tate and this idea of the manosphere. But what were you about to say something, or were you just introducing that as a question?
Well, I was about to say that I personally enjoy that kind of thing because self-improvement is part of the polywar. It's one of the attacks on us. Is obviously to make us feel inferior and we are parasites and we're useless eaters and all that kind of thing. And we lose what it means also just to be a man and to be a husband and to be a father. I am about to be a father for a second time. You've got kids. And these things become very real when you're in the situation. And they matter, Charles, they do matter. And it's great to be able to discuss it like I did with James. I actually forgot where I was going to go with that point, by the way.
Okay, well, don't worry, because I will absolutely bring you back on track, or at least onto the track I wanted to go, which is to make the connection between what your discussion with James Walton brought out and what Andrew Tate is or does. And I think it's completely fascinating that people, and this does not just apply to the manosphere. This is almost all of popular culture, which is about status, is about having your face on the screen. It's about projecting an image. It's about having money and gadgets. And apparently this is all put under the banner of success. You are successful if you've achieved all of those things. And I find it hilarious because if you then listen to your conversation with James Walton, it doesn't have to even be that much detail because clearly that's something that he goes into in considerable detail. And for anyone who hasn't listened to that, James Walton, I think, is he to describe himself as a prepper? Or maybe that's not quite the right word. I can't remember.
Yeah,
or survivalist or...
he is
but anyway,
but it's got very bad connotations.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, okay. So maybe that's the wrong word. But the point is that he is looking at life as being a practical challenge. And he's asking the question, as I think we all should, which is what if, what if the grid does go down? What if the shops do run out of food? What if this, that, and the other? And I have to say, throughout time, that's always been a possibility. If you haven't had access to or control over any of those things, then I think you're incredibly naive to just assume that stuff will roll on and it will be absolutely fine, even if by and large that is your experience. So to have a what if plan is very good. Now, what I find hilarious about Andrew Tate and his acolytes, if that's who they are, they drive these, I mean, you're always seeing these I don't know, Lamborghini or Ferrari cars, whatever. I'm just imagining how comic it would be if a carburetor or fan belt or something broke, or there was a, exhaust manifold issue, and how much use any of those guys would be at dealing with it. Similarly, if the electrics failed, how many of them would be able to go to the distribution board and work out what was wrong and how to correct it? And the point I'm getting to, which I think is fairly obvious, is that actually these guys, for all their sort of aphorisms and projection of well, I don't know what it is exactly they are projecting, but they're useless as far as I can work out. They are useless. Andrew Tate, I think, built his reputation as a mixed martial arts fighter. Okay, that I'm not dismissing as useless. He's obviously physically fit, strong, and capable in that regard. And this is not an attack on him. I've never met him. I don't know him, but I'm guessing that a lot of the other people that were in this documentary that Louis Theroux has just produced are, I would say, in my definition of what is or isn't helpful in life or in society, I think they are all useless. So if you switched off the money tap, then there's nothing. And I think that's the bit that I am sort of amazed and disappointed that people get drawn into thinking is wonderful. But as I say, I think that's sort of always been the case. You know, the idea of popular icons as being useful people. I don't know if there was really ever a time where that was that was the case in a sort of majority sense. So that's why I think the James Walton discussion and the manosphere idea is a really interesting juxtaposition, because it's not, you know, to say that you can fix the plumbing or you can source water or you can grow stuff or whatever. I mean, that for some reason doesn't have popular appeal. And the question's got to be, well, why? How much help is it to be able to drive a Lamborghini as compared with providing food for your family?
But I mean, it does go also deeper than that. In my view, one of the most valuable takeaways from a discussion with James about EDC and prepping and all that kind of stuff is precisely everything that we ever talk about, the control grid and all of these things that are top-down impositions. And by sitting back and moaning and pointing fingers at them and going, well, we need to wait for the government to fix things. We need to wait. He talks about taking responsibility, being able to get into the situation yourself and solve the problem, which unfortunately, Charles, a lot of what's going on, and there's a very interesting segue here that I think I'm building here into what I want to talk to you about. Not taking responsibility for your actions.
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. Not taking responsibility for your actions, but you know, to go back to that, the sort of the glamorizing of people who are completely unable to not just necessarily take responsibility for their own actions, but are not in fact responsible really for their own lives. And so this, again, the manosphere, I dare say a lot of it is just a front. It's a charade. I have no idea where these people are getting the money that they're supposed to have. But without it, there is nothing there. And I think that's the really significant thing. The point that Andrew Tate has always made consistently is that he has enough money to be able to, by and large, ignore all the diktats that other people might be concerned about. So that's been his approach, as opposed to well, just build your life in such a way that you're controlling every element of it. And I would say that he's not controlling any of the elements of his life. He's completely, or he and these other people are completely and utterly reliant on the supply chains that they're able to purchase from. So, and I would not describe those as being resilient. So yeah, anyway, but you carry on.
Well, you know what I'm going to bring up now.
Yeah, I do.
We spoke about it earlier. And everything at the moment on social media is centering around this trial that's happening in the US with this mother, Lindsay, what's her name? Clancy. She murdered her 3 kids by strangling them and is now claiming that she's not guilty of a criminal offense. And there's such an interesting bigger discussion going on here because it's about the system and it's about medicalisation of quote unquote mental illness. It's about feminism and how women, you've seen these videos of these women coming together in the hundreds, protecting her, defending her, saying that she's innocent. And there's a complete inversion of sanity going on here, and it's baffling. And I wonder how much of this is by design. And I think a lot of it is by design, but over a long period of time.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I certainly wouldn't claim to know a huge amount either about the trial that's ongoing or the circumstances leading up to it. But certainly looking at the optics in the way that it's being covered and the response to it is very perplexing. But to come back to the point that you were making the connection with in terms of taking responsibility, I think this actually is a thread that runs through quite a lot of what we discuss, which is that if her defense is that she was in effect not in control because she was hallucinating and she was being directed by a voice or voices to do this, and in actual fact it seems not at all straightforward in that she was, as far as I understand it, she was considering that she was not
she said,
worthy of life. Well, she said she wasn't doing voices. She had to die. So, okay, well, again, there are many levels to this, but the point is that you see, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you, on the one hand, you're claiming that you didn't have control, and therefore you're not liable, you're not at fault. It can't have been a criminal offence. But at the same time, there was a rationale because she has stated that she believed that she should kill herself, and that therefore the logical conclusion was that the children wouldn't survive without her. So that's why she had to kill them. But at the same time, arguing that you are not responsible because this was being dictated to you. So it's a circle in a way that I think can't quite be squared. But the point of it is that that it's very much in the spirit of the age where it's another thing that's apparently nobody's fault, and that is what we see more and more of now. And that is, I mean, apart from the specifics of it, which are of course absolutely horrific, but the sort of bigger picture of there not being any responsibility and being able to pursue a line like that through the legal system is, I think, increasingly frequent and therefore really problematic.
And I mean, I don't want to get into the specifics because we aren't analyzing the specifics. We're talking about the sort of macro picture here. But it is also, it's bewildering to me, Charles, that we are in a position today where we are kicking the can down the road going, well, she premeditated it. She got her husband to leave the house. She planned it. She thought about it. That's premeditated. And then she strangled all of them, and then committed suicide in a half-assed way. She jumped out of the window and got paralyzed. So she committed the crime. Now, if she had voices in her head, which apparently I believe is not the case, and all of these things, these are all deflections to make her a victim. And I find this is a big problem of kind of the postmodern movement. It's part of the feminist movement. It's to, if it was, let's turn it around. Let's say it was a man, the father. Let's say he killed his 3 kids. Do you think we'd be seeing the same kind of conversations right now? No, he'd be a monster and hang him out to dry and all this kind of stuff. But with her, she's troubled and the system failed her, and we need to have sympathy for her. And for me, there's a complete disconnect going on here. And it's a lot larger than the incident itself.
I think that's fair. And I think your point about the difference between how these things are managed, depending on whether it's a man or a woman that supposedly perpetrated the crime, let's say, yeah, that's very stark. I think also it's another instance where more than one thing can be true. And on the point about, the system, well, first of all, what system? What is that system? How is it meant to work? And could it have made an intervention that would have prevented this from happening? And even if it could, is that really the purpose of the system? Is the balance of responsibility between the individual and the system weighted towards the system? Are we really meant to believe that our lives in certain instances should be managed by something other than ourselves? And the problem with that question in this specific case, I think, is that she was already, as far as I understand, again, limited understanding, and the specifics don't matter to a huge extent, but the simple fact is it seems to be beyond doubt that she had a relationship with pharmaceutical products that was very significant. And I think it cannot be regarded as irrelevant that this happened in the United States, where I think the attitude to and the control of the big pharma is completely different, really, from anywhere else in the world. And probably this would apply particularly in a relative sense to psychology or psychiatry or whatever branch of sort of mind science exactly this would be related to. But that I don't think that can be dismissed. And again, it's not to say, therefore, that, well, in which case she definitely did have no responsibility. But the point is, you are faced with an impossible hypothetical, which is, well, what if she'd never encountered any of these drugs? And I think anyone who's ever ingested any sort of medication will, if they're really sort of compelled to think about it, will acknowledge that whilst it might be intended that it changes something physically, there is a mental effect. And just on a personal note, I vividly remember that with what the British Army was describing as an anti-malarial drug, the brand name of which was Lariam. I can't remember what the chemical name for Lariam is, but it was a product that was supposed to be taken by exercising troops who were going to go to Africa. And it was a very interesting one because I said that I wouldn't take it because I was very well aware, first of all, of what the supposed symptoms of malaria are, having supposedly had it before, and also understanding the physical relationship. Anyway, long and boring story, but in the end, I was given an ultimatum of, right, well, you're off the course if you don't take it. And okay, looking back, I think I made the wrong decision, but I did take it, or rather I took one pill and suffered, not absolutely immediately, but sort of about 12 hours later, very, very serious sort of side effects. But they were absolutely mental. It completely scrambled my brain. And so not that it had I didn't go and do anything stupid, but I was completely incapacitated. So that's just a small example of how a pharmaceutical product can affect you. Now, if you've been on multiple products for years and you are also sort of associated with this, but in a way distinctly separate, you are struggling as a mother with 3 children, which, let's face it, is not, that's not an unusual struggle to have. It absolutely is difficult, especially given all the societal pressures. It is a difficult position to be in. But it does create this hypothetical of, well, what if she had never encountered any of those drugs? Would this reality have been possible? And that, of course, is a question that nobody can really answer. And so then we're left in the hands of, so-called experts with testimony about, well, this is what was being demonstrated there, as though they can really know that. And I find that completely peculiar. And I think it reminds one, to a certain extent, of the very, very dodgy contribution to the Lucy Letby supposed murders here in the United Kingdom. A nurse who was accused of and has been convicted of murdering a number of babies. And a lot of this hung on the testimony of a so-called expert witness, this guy called Dr. Dowie Evans. And what's so remarkable about that is that he, in effect, sort of interposed himself. He sort of forced his way in to the case and was determining whether or not something was murder. I mean, it was so far beyond what he should have been able to contribute as a supposedly expert witness. So I don't mean to diverge too much from the topic, but the point is, we just when it enters into the legal realm, there are just so many sort of spin-off topics and areas that we can't really ever understand or make sense of. And so then it does become a question of, right, well, what's going to be drawn out of it? What's going to be made important? And to your point, this has been seized upon in really the most perverse way by sort of feminist groups.
But that's exactly right, yes.
Yeah, and I think, that is odd. But because obviously you've looked at this more than me. I mean, what is your take on that, on the agenda, and as you say, whether is that sort of organic or where's it come from, where's it going?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you remember, Rachel Wilson was on my show. I think close to over a year ago.
I do remember.
I
don't know. Yeah,
and her husband Andrew, who has also been on my show, but not on my UK column show. I'm unable to get him because he's too busy at the moment. He's been on Rogan a few times, and once you're on Rogan, you become impossible to get hold of. But they have argued a lot that this is a domino effect, going all the way back to basically the introduction of the Federal Reserve and putting women against men, and then the sort of the occultic roots of the feminist women's liberation movement, ironically, which is not about liberation, because what were they liberated from? We end up with a culture of anti-humanism. We see the hatred for babies and this weird kind of rhetoric that an unborn baby is a parasite. And you see what's going on in the US, how they're pushing that age of what do you call it? That termination period, closer and closer to birth. In some areas now, at birth. And what's the difference between just before birth or just after birth? It's a parasite. I don't really want it. It's interfering with my life. Let's just get rid of it. And once we disconnect the humanity from a baby, we end up with this culture of disconnect from our own family. What about her? What about this woman's husband? What do they not talk, or did they not talk? If I'm lying in bed with my wife, she'll say, it was a rough day yesterday. And then as you do, as a couple, you go, well, let me help. Or because you do things together so that the other person doesn't end up, killing your kids. And so what I'm getting at is, to get to this point, there's a long line of events that have occurred. And that's on top of the pharmaceutical industry making people more and more sick, the over-medicalization of quote-unquote mental illness. I mean, what exactly is mental illness?
Yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. A very, very difficult question to answer in any objective sense. And I think we're seeing this, the subjective drift, or at least the drift towards subjectivity in every respect, especially when anything or anyone presents as being outside of the mold that the establishment wants people to fit into. So, for example, if you're expressing views about government that aren't necessarily to suggest that you support its every action, then you're drifting immediately straight away towards being classified as an extremist. And that is not at all how the absolutely overwhelming majority of people who might think like that would ever classify themselves. So the question is who gets to decide. And I think mental illness is exactly in that area. Who does get to decide? Some people will feel that they are, and therefore will be able to describe that they are. But for other people, it might simply be behavior that's looked at through a different lens, and that can be enough to trigger the idea that the person being viewed is mentally unwell. Well, I mean, again, who's to say, really? I think it's very, very difficult. I think the other thing, in to your point about the anti sort of human nature of all of this, and the idea that, especially with the increasing promotion of and much more significantly, really, the protection of abortion, and just to remind people the lengths that's gone to in the United Kingdom with the what results in the criminalization of any sort of activity anywhere near an abortion centre. The primary purpose, in many respects, of what are called public spaces protection orders, I think, may be regarded as the protection of the abortion industry. And just to highlight how absolutely ludicrous it is, this has been exposed by several Christians who have been to the proximity of abortion centres in order to offer support to people who are either on their way in or on their way out. And that has been reduced down to being told not to do that, not to engage. And therefore, they've just had a presence there. And in their own words, they've been praying silently in their own heads. And that has been enough to find them in breach of a public spaces protection order, which then may result in a criminal sanction. So it is perfectly remarkable that that's the direction that this can go in. But I think on the sort of human or humanity agenda, one of the extraordinary things, again, that I think should have struck people, but apparently didn't, was that 2020 and 2021 across most of the world was a period where apparently, it was all about saving lives and flattening the curve and this, that, and the other, and very much commemorating deaths of people who had supposedly died from, with, or some variant of this idea of COVID. And first of all, that completely marginalised the deaths of anybody else, which seemed a rather perverse outcome. But then the next thing was February 2022. We then switched modes, apparently, or we were invited to switch modes into, let's now, in effect, we've got those lives in the bank, so now we can expend them all by killing Russians, because that's really a good thing to be doing. And it fits in again to the abortion thing. So there are some instances in which it's absolutely imperative that we save that particular life, but we have no qualms about taking the other one over there. And that incredible inconsistency, I think, is it is very concerning that people, by and large, don't seem to see that. And the same, you could say the same about any of the conflict that's started since the end of the sort of COVID restrictions period. To be totally fixated on apparently saving lives, only to then go into overdrive on destroying lives, and now we're seeing the absolute, well, it's more than an undercurrent now towards war, all out war with Russia because of what's been sort of propagated in Ukraine. It is perverse beyond measure, but that's the way, that is the way I see it. It's a contradiction.
Yes. That dichotomy that you've just highlighted is very, very real. I've been thinking about this because, as you know, I've got a second child on the way. So this is quite close to the bone. But why I was pointing out that we have a long line of events, and I was referencing Rachel's amazing work because she's done years and years and years on this. Her book, by the way, The Occult Roots of Feminism, is worth getting. So you have a series of events here, right? So you start off by dehumanizing the baby, right? That's inside the mom, right? It's a parasite. It's just a clump of cells. It's an invader. And what you're doing is you're severing the emotional and the moral bond between the mother and the child, right? But then after that, you then normalize the disposal, right, of that child, because it's not killing, it's healthcare. It's family planning, bodily autonomy, that kind of thing, right? Now extend this along a little bit, Charles. All right. So if you can imagine a sliding scale here, you now have disconnected babies from the parents. It's now an outsider. You've now created a boundary where it's okay to get rid of babies. But hold on. Now we're going to discuss at what period of time. If it's 14 days, no, we'll extend it all the way to 9 months. Then eventually we can go, well, what's 9 months? Let's just do it after birth. In the first year, if it's in the way, if it's a parasite still, we can get rid of it. And ultimately what you're doing is you're removing accountability. This is what we were talking about earlier. You're removing accountability and you're now blaming something else. And the woman then becomes the victim again, as we're seeing in this particular case. And ultimately you've got a dismantling of the family. Can you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I can.
And you have
absolutely.
you have a societal collapse.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think this actually relates back to the point I think I was trying to make about the distinction between somebody like Andrew Tate and somebody like James Walton. And if I had to pick one of those guys to be alongside, in, I should think, pretty much any circumstance, it would be James. And that's not to say I'm joining the burgeoning band of Andrew Tate haters, because I'm certainly not in that category. I have no axe to grind with him, but I just don't think, apart from his martial arts skills, I don't think he's a useful human being in the way that I would regard usefulness.
No, he's not a good example.
So that's why we're going along that. However, where I think things become problematic is when, and again, it's such dangerous territory, because how do we really know? So we have to sort of stick with what we do know, but to wind the clock back, and so if we take the point that you're talking about, which is in effect where stuff is actually just a choice. It's not forced, that there's no an element of necessity. But where I'm going with this is back in time, and actually, as far as one understands, not that far back in time. And I mean, let's face it, quite possibly in certain parts of the world now, it's possible does still happen. But the idea of infanticide as a practice is something that absolutely, definitely did exist. And this is where I know we've talked about this a bit before, and I think you and I probably diverge to a certain extent on this. But the idea of where we sort of draw the line between the animal kingdom and human beings. And we're obviously able to look now at the situation with Lindsay Clancy and be completely sort of horrified by what happened and repulsed by it. But then actually our own species did exactly that thing, but for reasons that, as far as we understand, were completely different. And that's what creates that much greater degree of proximity to the animal kingdom. Now, you look at the animal kingdom, multiple species will, in certain circumstances, kill their own young. Now, the way that we explain that is that there is a practical benefit to doing so. Either it's because there is a scarcity of food, and therefore the offspring would not survive, which is why the process is carried out, because it saves that period and it allows perpetuation of that species, or that there is some sort of a defect with that particular offspring.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what it is.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then there's the sort of genetic side of it. So I think this is seen particularly in big cats where males will try to kill the offspring of another male in order to perpetuate their own bloodline and bring the female back on heat so that they can mate. So I mean, there are a load of things that we look at from the outside as being instinctive. How can we really know whether it is entirely instinctive or whether there is any sort of flicker of emotion during any of that? What we do know for sure is that with human beings, when we see that, even at a distance far removed, like the Lindsay Clancy case, we absolutely experience that emotion. But the point is that that going back in time, not very far, and I believe it's well documented, this was happening in the 20th century, and it was apparently practiced by humans. Okay, there were absolutely instances in which it was ideological or sort of quasi-religious as well. So it is a very, very complicated and sort of nuanced picture. But the point is that people believed they were doing it for the right reason, and that wasn't some sort of paranoid voice in the head type thing. It was part of some kind of either custom in terms of it was a sacrifice or whatever. And I'm not saying this saying, so therefore it's all absolutely fine. We can justify it like that because it was done before and there was a practical benefit. But the point is that we are living in this bizarre world where somebody like Andrew Tate can just have loads of money and Ferraris, and we think that means something.
Charles, we don't diverge on this. I agree with everything you said. The additional point I'll add is when animals do that, there is a nature-based reason for that. For example, if you have a bunch of lion cubs being born and the one is white, now more often than not, that lion cub will get killed by the mother, or it will end up being pushed out. And there's a good reason for that, because it will bring down that pride. it becomes noticeable, and it puts the rest of the cubs in danger because it sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, if we apply that to humans, obviously it's more difficult to wrap your head around, but there would also, I guess, be a reason for it that is about the preservation of that family, not the destruction of the family, if that makes sense. So in other words, the lioness kills that white cub for the preservation of the family. What this woman was doing was for her own selfish means. She didn't have the will to live anymore for whatever reason, and decided that her kids therefore shouldn't live either.
Yes.
So it was selfish, if that makes sense. It wasn't about the preservation of anything.
Well, yes. I mean, this is the thing, and this is where this was the point at which I think that our points of view might be slightly divergent. I'm not at all saying that this is the case, but I think from previous conversations, what I'm trying to say or trying to suggest is that sort of unknown of, well, how much of what we do it does still flicker back to, sort of primeval instinct, let's say.
Okay.
So, and I don't know. I mean, I'm just putting it out there. So the reason I talked about, that's fine. But the reason I spoke about the Lindsay Clancy thing in terms of a hypothetical with the pharmaceuticals is that what we can't know is whether in some way any of her thought process was triggered by some kind of instinct, because again, I know we seem to have different takes on what was said, but let's just say that what I had heard was the case, which is that she believed she should end her own life because, well, it doesn't really matter why, but let's say that was because she believed that it was going to be a disaster, in that, they were all going to starve or whatever the outcome could have been, and therefore that was why she did it. Then that does actually conform to the sort of natural or instinctive motivation for infanticide. Of course, we can't know, but all I'm suggesting is that are there flashes, even in this bizarre world we live in, where for most people, I think, in the world, most things are a choice rather than a necessity.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
is it possible? No. I don't know.
Yes, I think you are on to something. I don't disagree with that either, because I, for example, in 2020, I was taking SSRIs, which are completely terrible idea. And I don't take any medication now for anything.
I don't know what that means. Okay.
Antidepressants.
All right.
And probably the worst kind. And and I'm very glad to say that I'm no longer on any of that stuff. But I was being eaten up and consumed by this whole COVID thing, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Let me say that when you take that medication, it certainly changes something in you. There's no doubt about that, right? It's certainly doing something, and it's not good, because what it's doing is that from my experience, is that it's removing any kind of, I don't know, sense of morality to some degree. Like you care less about things, and I mean you have less care for certain behaviors. And I can understand to some degree how the pharmaceuticals, excuse me, can do that. Kind of like if you drink alcohol, it changes something. It changes something in your wiring for a while. Now, but the question here is, in spite of all of that, are you going to go and kill somebody if you're intoxicated? Are you actually going to take a knife and kill somebody in your house if you're drunk? I suppose some people, that is a reality. But then I'd like to think that goes deeper than just the alcohol, because something's going on in your head even before you've been drinking that takes you to that point. And if you've got postpartum, hang on, excuse me, if you've got depression because of kids, and I know that this is a common thing, but why have 3 kids? Why not stop after 1?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is it. This is where it's very difficult to second guess any of this, and and as a complete outsider to review this stuff sort of online or to hear in court testimony, it's so difficult to get any sense of what really has gone on, because, as I said earlier, we're into the sort of legal domain where it becomes a point of arguing a certain thing rather than necessarily being able to discuss what happened.
Hold on. Let's pause and pull back and break this apart, because I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of her particular case. As I said earlier, I'm trying to talk about the bigger picture, but without getting distracted, as is often the case in the distraction economy, the first thing is the first thing. She admitted to killing her kids, right? So therefore, I think in any reasonable society, that is something that requires accountability, right? She killed 3 innocent kids. They didn't ask to die, and she has to face the consequences. I think that's fair. Now, the second conversation that we can have is what led to that. And I think we can, like you said earlier, multiple things can be true. I think we can have multiple conversations here, but I think one of the big things that the sort of postmodern feminist movement has brought is this blurriness, this fuzziness. Oh, well, she was on so many drugs that we can't really blame her. Because, Charles, think about how slippery that slope can get.
I agree. And that wasn't really my point of introducing the pharmaceutical argument. But what I really meant by that was, and this may have been done, but has there been any scrutiny of the people that were just willy-nilly writing prescription after prescription for her?
And that's a big deal also. That's a big deal.
And I think this is what I mean. And this doesn't pertain just to the area of mental health. This is everything. This is just stuff being done on the nod, and it is just no way for a society to run. And this is in large part when you're trying to identify where the line is between cock-up and conspiracy. The reason that conspiracy is so terribly easy these days is because cock-up is so very straightforward to engineer, because people do not scrutinize stuff. They do not ask the questions that should be asked. And almost never do they say no when something that we can see in retrospect shouldn't have gone ahead. And so there are many factors to this. So I dare say, this is why I say that two things, or more than two. I mean, more than one thing can be true at the same time. And so, whilst I don't suggest that that we just blame the pharmaceuticals, I think that we should be looking at the people who are in charge of making that sort of thing happen, and what did they think their responsibilities were, and who else was involved in any of this. I mean, okay, it does seem, and again, I know we don't want to get drawn into the specifics, but it does seem also that she was sort of withholding information, I think, from the people that she was dealing with on the pharmaceutical side of it. So again, as I say, you just don't, you never get away from the fact that it was the individual that did it. But then what should society's response be? I mean, because actually the other thing I wasn't clear on, that hasn't, as far as I'm aware, emerged. Has she shown remorse for this? Do you know what she is said to feel about it?
I don't know.
Well, I think that's a really fundamental question. Because if she's claiming that she was hallucinating, I can't remember what the actual term was, but being dictated to by voices, although had consciously considered that she was going to have to end her own life. I mean, the whole thing is very confusing. But does it follow logically, therefore, that she would express remorse after having done that, but failed to kill herself? I don't know, but I do think that. But
I mean, even if she does show remorse, does it matter? Because she's apparently mad. She's unstable and all this.
Yes, I mean, okay, I think it matters, because one of the big questions, again, that we touch on quite a regular basis is what is the answer in terms of criminal justice? Sending people to prison statistically absolutely doesn't work.
No.
And yet, nor does the idea, well, you just go and sweep a few leaves for 6 months and then you'll be okay. That doesn't seem to work either. So what does work? And the reason I asked the question about remorse is that if we take at face value what's being said, which is that she was being dictated to and then snapped out of it, can there be any worse punishment than realizing that you've killed all of your own 3 children?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, there are parallels that can easily be made here. We spoke about animals earlier, so let me come back to that. Let's talk about rhino horn poaching. This is a good one. So it's a big deal here in South Africa. For most of the world, it's not a big deal at all. Nobody really cares. But for us, it's a big deal because there are only so many rhinos and they are all in captivity because they have to be. Now, there is an individual who goes into the game park to find the rhino and mutilates it to get the horn. There is an individual involved. And he's almost always expendable. But there'll always be more of him, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does, yeah.
So when you zoom out, you realize, well, there's a system. There's an entire organizational, structural framework that enables this. And I think this is maybe where the discussion from the feminist side does have some validity. There is an entire framework and a structure that has enabled the over-medicalization of not just women, but I suppose people in general. I mean, if you look at the United States, right? I mean, I think something like 20% or 25, even 30% of all women are on antidepressants. Yet they were liberated 100 years ago, Charles. What are they unhappy about? But they're aborting a million babies a year. Now, you can't tell me that does not have some long-term negative impact on the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely it does. I don't think one can be skeptical enough or even cynical enough about the objectives of not just the pharmaceutical industry, but I think it's a very easy one to see. I would wager that anyone who has had any involvement with this sort of situation, so again, not to focus on Lindsay Clancy's case, but let's say her former husband, I would put money on him having been medicalized at some point as a result of the trauma. So my point is that if the moment you start to medicalize, particularly if it's to do with so-called mental health, you will get an outcome that has a knock-on effect, especially if it's a mother. What are the chances in this day and age, I would ask, what are the chances of a mother being on some sort of antidepressant medication that is not going to result in the children subsequently being on some sort of a medication because they have to deal with the effect that this has on the mother? And so it is, it's this incredible self-perpetuating system. Okay, abortion, obviously, we have to put slightly to one side because that is, that's a termination of. But otherwise, we're talking about an industry that thrives on reducing people's capacity, but keeping them alive. And the more people you do that to, the way I see it, means that the more people you have as potential customers because society starts to weigh itself down, or has done. I mean, look at where we are. By any metric now, we are in a far, far worse state than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And the only thing that people ever can point back to is life expectancy. And that, for me, is simply not an indicator of whether or not a society is healthy.
No, exactly right.
We look at the way in which people can be kept alive. I mean, it sounds grim, but just kept alive. That's not quality of life.
No, that's not quality of life. I mean, why life expectancy? So you take somebody and put them on life support, and then they're on life support and they live an extra 5 years, but they're in a coma the whole time. Is that now what we're wanting?
Mm. Well, exactly. Although we have to be consistent and just going back to, so I'm not, don't want to get to the point in the conversation where it looks like we're sort of advocating for people to be knocked on the head at some stage in life, because it just doesn't look like their life is good enough. Because, of course, first of all, that straight away plays into the hands of what Lindsay Clancy is claiming that she was doing. But also it goes straight back to the abortion argument, because it gives much greater credence to the idea of, this sort of notion that, well, we know best. We know that doing this is the best outcome because it's not going to enable a sort of miserable life for the as yet unborn child. So it's a very, very complicated area, and I don't think that's why I wanted to introduce the idea of, first of all, human history, where infanticide was absolutely well documented and prevalent, I would say, in many societies. But also the idea that we look at the natural world now and we see it. And again, this idea about defects and whatnot, and to look, how do we really look at humans these days, where we are able to intervene in almost every situation. We can intervene to deal with what we perceive to be a problem. It's really, really difficult, because if you do that with animals, and you say at birth, and the most obvious example of this is hatching chicks of, frankly, any species, but any chick that hatches that isn't immediately able to look after itself, and I'm talking about in an incubated context as opposed to being mothered, because the mother will basically make that decision, but anything that hatches that has not immediately got a grasp of being able to walk and peck, if you intervene to in any way try to help that creature, the likelihood is that it will not work. It will end up dying. And this is the difficulty, but this is, of course, given rise to all the philosophies over the years about how we consider that sort of thing with humans. But it is terribly difficult, because we think that we have a sort of monopoly on emotion where this is concerned, in a way that we believe that animals don't. We don't know that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about, but the idea that any mammal that is born immediately gets onto its feet. Humans are the only ones that can't. I mean, we're utterly useless for the first 2-3 years of our life, even longer.
Yeah, but this. Well, I think it is related, because the supposedly the theory for that is because it enables greater brain development, and that's why we end up having the emotions, and that's why we're having this discussion in the first place, because we believe that what Lindsay Clancy did was absolutely horrific. Whereas if a lioness had done it, that you're not going to find two lions lying there in the bush going, God, that was bloody awful, I can't believe she did it. So, or at least that's what we believe, but we don't know. And you do see animals missing each other. They're very well documented that elephants will travel long distances to visit the site on which a family of theirs have died. So we are stupid to dismiss animals as, in effect, being sort of dumb or sub-intelligent. They just have intelligence in a completely different way. The point I'm sort of trying to get to is that, yes, in many respects, I think we can absolutely distinguish ourselves from any of that, but I don't think we can totally. But anyway, to the point about the period of time in the womb, that is supposedly the argument for it. So we sacrifice the sort of physical attributes, in that we have to be protected by usually a mother, or mother and father, for a considerable period of time. But that's because our brain has developed sufficiently so that we can then go on to do what we are supposed to do. But it's very complicated.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time, so I'm going to use this opportunity to circle back right to the beginning of our discussion about the manosphere and masculinity and men.
Good.
And I'm going to say this. All this talk about women killing their babies, etc., I want to also say that men need to be men again. I mean, would she have gone to that extreme perhaps if her husband was a better husband? I don't know the details, but hold up a mirror and don't always shift the blame. Be a better man. I mean, be the best partner to your other half that you can be, and perhaps they won't end up on pharmaceuticals and going down terrible dark spirals, and that's taking responsibility also.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I thought one thing that struck me, I think he was quoting somebody else, but James Walton said that good times create soft men, and I think that is absolutely what we're looking at. We have been looking at it for some time. And I think that, again, not wanting to go into the specifics, how on earth am I meant to know? But I think, yes, in many of these cases, you do have to ask the question, well, how on earth did it get to that point? Again, very easy to do in retrospect, very easy to do when you're totally outside of that situation. But at each of those points, did so-and-so, in particular, the husband, stand up and do what needed to be done? And I think increasingly, and very unfortunately, the answer is no, because look at what people tolerated during the lockdown periods. Why on earth did people en masse tolerate the fact that their children were in effect either locked into or locked out of a system by which they should really be flourishing? It was absolutely dreadful. And yet the number of people who stood up and really fought to protect their families was minuscule.
So this is a plea to go and find my UK column show with James Walton. It's a bit of a plug. It's a bit of a plug. Yeah. But in general, go and listen to UK column. How about that?
Yes. That's a good one.
All right, Charles. Always a pleasure chatting to you. Catch up with you next week.
Bro. Thanks, Jerm.
Thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you got value from it, consider joining as a channel member, which directly supports what we do here. The link is below, and if you're hungry for more, here are 2 more videos for you, and we'll see you in the next one.